If you've been watching the economy lately, it probably feels oddly calm. Inflation isn't screaming anymore, jobs are still there, markets look like they've decided everything is fine. And that's exactly why this moment matters. Because the most dangerous part of an economic cycle usually isn't the crash. It's the quiet phase right before the story changes. The phase where nothing looks broken yet, but the incentives underneath the surface start flipping. That's what this video is about. I want to walk you through the cycle most people don't notice, the one that doesn't show up as a headline until it's already late. We're going to look at why better inflation can still feel expensive, why the labor market can look stable while the ground gets softer, and why credit stress is one of the first places the real story leaks out. And I'll be honest, I don't think we're in a clean boom or a clean bust. I think we're in that in-between zone where the economy is still moving, but it starts moving differently. So let's start with what everyone sees: inflation. On paper, the US CPI has been running around 2.7% year over year as of December 2025. That sounds pretty normal compared to the last few years, right? But do you remember the weird part of inflation? Even when inflation cools down, prices don't go backwards. Most of the time, they just rise more slowly. So people hear 2.7% and think relief, but their grocery bill still feels like a permanent tax. And then there's jobs. In the latest employment report, unemployment was about 4.4% in December 2025, and payroll growth was modest, around plus 50,000. That's not collapse. That's not a recession headline. But it's also not the kind of job growth that makes you feel like the economy is accelerating. It's more like the economy is holding its breath. Now layer in rates. The Fed's policy rate has been in the 3.5 to 3.75% neighborhood, and Fed officials have been signaling they want to be deliberate. Basically, we're in a decent place. We can wait. When rates stop moving, people assume the story is over. But here's where the quiet phase starts doing its work. The pressure doesn't show up first in the big headline numbers. It shows up in credit, the stuff regular people and businesses use to bridge real life. The New York Fed has been tracking household debt delinquencies, and notes delinquency levels are still elevated, with 4.5% of outstanding debt in some stage of delinquency in 2025 Q3, and stress showing up in areas like credit cards and student loans. That doesn't mean everything is falling apart tomorrow. It means the cycle is quietly sorting winners and losers, and that sorting process is usually the part that decides what happens next. Because once credit gets tight, once people start juggling balances, extending payments, cutting corners, that's when the real economy starts changing shape. And the question I want you to sit with is simple. Have you noticed that a lot of people are still functioning, but with less margin, less room for mistakes? That less margin is the quiet phase. One of the things that makes this phase so hard to talk about is that it doesn't feel dramatic. There's no single breaking point, no obvious villain, no clean moment where everyone suddenly agrees something changed. Instead, it shows up in small decisions. Companies slow hiring instead of laying people off. Households stretch payments instead of defaulting. Consumers trade down quietly, generic brands, fewer extras, fewer risks. On the surface, the system still works, but underneath, behavior shifts. And behavior is where cycles actually turn. You can see it in lending standards tightening just a bit. You can see it in banks being more selective, even if they don't say it out loud. You can see it in how people talk about money. Less optimism, more caution. Not panic, just restraint. That's the part most headlines miss. Because economic cycles don't end when people run out of money. They turn when people run out of confidence in the future. When they stop assuming next year will be easier than this one. Do you remember how different spending felt a few years ago? How easy it felt to say yes to a purchase, a plan, a risk? Compare that to now. Even people who are doing fine are thinking twice. That hesitation is the signal. And this is why the quiet phase matters so much. If things reaccelerate, if productivity improves, if incomes catch up, if credit stress eases, this phase becomes a pause before the next leg higher. But if credit keeps tightening and margins keep shrinking, this is the part people look back on and say, that's when it started changing. Not with a crash, with a shift. I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you this because understanding the cycle early gives you options. It lets you think more clearly. It lets you separate noise from structure. Because here's the truth. The economy doesn't care about narratives. It responds to incentives, to pressure, to behavior. And right now, behavior is changing. Slowly, quietly, almost politely. My personal take? I don't think this is a moment for panic. But I also don't think it's a moment for complacency. The quiet phase is when paying attention actually matters. When small choices, saving a little more, taking fewer risks, staying flexible, end up being the right ones. I try to watch what people do, not what they say. And what I see right now is caution spreading before fear ever shows up. That usually means the story isn't over yet. If you're noticing the same thing, you're probably not wrong. That's all for today.